Let's take this further here on the program tonight on RT International. Getting the thoughts now and joining our guest, Dr. Jan Oberg, the director of the Transnational Foundation for Peace and Future Research. A great pleasure to have you with us here on RT International. Thanks for joining us for this special rolling coverage. What do you think, sir? Pelosi's trip, has it all been a very coordinated trip or just a bit of a chaotic one? I mean, on the one hand, you have the Biden administration saying it's not keen on the timing, and yet Pelosi almost seems to be on a personal crusade. What are your thoughts, Doctor?
Well, she's known for being very xenophobic back in time, too. I think it's well coordinated. I heard Secretary of State Blinken say today that we can't prevent her from going and it's her own choice. And I think President Biden said some days ago that the American military thought it was not a good time to go. Of course, they could have stopped her from going if they wanted to, but they probably want to distance themselves in the sense that this was not America. It was Nancy Pelosi herself coming. But she's number 3 in the ranking order of the United States political system. So the Chinese are not going to be fooled by this. I think also one should be very aware that it comes as part of a larger picture. The largest picture is the ongoing Cold War that the U.S. runs, more or less with the help of European Union countries, against China. We have documented this in our foundation's smokescreen report. There's a very well orchestrated, very well financed campaign going on. You can only hear negative stories about China in the Western mainstream press. There's an American payment to media for writing negative stories about China, etc. And, her demonstrative visit, provocative, reckless visit, which does not, as far as I can hear, have any kind of communication content that she could not convey in other ways, such as she supports democracy in Taiwan. You could sit in Washington and say that. Has to do with the fact that it's a matter of provoking people and see what the response will be. And fortunately, so far, the Chinese response has been very modest, I would say, because this is, people in the West don't understand this, and many people have, of course, not been to China, but this is very, very serious for the Chinese leadership.
Well, let's talk about this, Dr. Oberg. I mean, you talk about provocations, for example. Now, we know that various Western countries have been doing their freedom of navigation acts and sailing their destroyers and their vessels through the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait for years now. And this ongoing spat between Washington and China and America, it's been going on for quite some time now. But now we're really seeing the rhetoric getting fired up. In fact, as you and me are speaking right now, Nancy Pelosi touched down just a couple of hours ago in Taipei. What's going on now? China's launching overnight drills. In fact, if you go to various RT Telegram channels and otherwise, you will see some amazing footage right now, pretty concerning footage of war games late at night over the island of Taiwan. Is it possible here that this is the closest that Washington and Beijing have come in real life to some sort of real head-on conflict, do you think?
Yes and no. Parts of this it's difficult to read what the Chinese are trying to convey with these images, which I could not see when you showed them. I think there's no doubt that China will do things in response to this, which will be more political and perhaps economic. I mean, they could have prevented her from landing it too. But what I see is the American, or U.S., I should say, incrementalism in provocation, something you've seen with NATO vis-a-vis Russia also in the NATO expansion of 30 years. Small steps all the time, each one of them not that serious, but then there comes, the last one which you should not have done, which was Ukraine, of course. And here you have, if you go back to 50 years, namely the Chu Enlai-Nixon meeting in February 1972. Paragraph 12 of that agreement says the U.S. accepts that it's Chinese on both sides, that Taiwan is China, that we will not interfere in that, etc., etc., etc. I'm not going to quote at length from it. What they have done over the time, incrementally, by military people, American military on Taiwan, with selling weapons, with what you mentioned, with constant negative stories, and also not Madam Pelosi from going there, the Chinese will read this as, you just want to do one more provocation and we're going to react to this. You know, the Chinese thinking is basically, we can take a lot, we can live with contradictions, we can live with the dialectics, we can live with provocations, but at one point we're going to sit down the foot, and that will not be a nice thing.
Well, Dr. Oberg, let's take this a little bit further. For example, Pelosi, as we know, is in her hotel room. It's about 2:10 in the morning in Taipei. One would assume that she's tucked into bed and sleeping off her jet lag, and perhaps she's got a big day tomorrow morning. What could Chinese officials do? How could they take this further when the sun comes up tomorrow morning? What do you think they have in store for Pelosi? Are they going to let her just walk around the island and do her PR stunt and her photo opportunities?
Yeah, they're not going to kill her or anything like that. I mean, that's a specialty of the Americans, killing people they don't like. So I don't know. They will probably say, OK, let that 82-year-old lady fool around. They will be very cross with the leadership of Taiwan for not preventing this visit, or for whatever way they receive her. And she will leave again. But I think the repercussions, the ongoing colder and colder war between China and the United States will be felt. And, you know, that is a tragedy for all of us, because if China and the US, if the Orient and the Occident, if the East and the West cannot come together and cooperate, humanity's future is doomed. We cannot solve the...
Well, Dr. Oberg, you talk about humanity being doomed. Sorry to jump in so quickly, but, you know, we had some analysts on earlier here on RT International this evening talking about there are certain flashpoints in the world that the US is directly or indirectly involved in. Ukraine is one of them, Taiwan is another, Serbia, Kosovo, and then Iran. Why are we at a point in the world where there are flashpoints uprising in certain parts of the world, and yet it always seems there's one key player that's involved? What's the point?
Well, if you mentioned Iran now, notice also that the sanctions that were introduced, I think yesterday, a couple of days ago, were hitting Chinese firms which do not accept secondary sanctions. Namely, that one thing is that the United States does not want to work with or trade with Iran, but it is also telling sovereign states in Europe and elsewhere in the world not to do anything economically with Iran. This is outrageous. It's time to have sanctions against the United States for these violations of sovereign countries. But I think you're right. And my interpretation, and you've heard me say that before, is the United States and the Western world, NATO, if you will, too, is on its way down in a macro-historical perspective. I mean, all empires go down at some point. The Soviet Union did it 30 years ago, and it's time now. I'm not saying it with any joy. I'm just saying this is history. And they are seeing that these games they are playing are not yielding results. They have a horrible problem with their economy. They've instigated sanctions that will hit predominantly the US allies in Europe. You don't get anywhere with China this way. Whatever they try to do, you know, combating the Belt and Road Initiative by some kind of other initiative that has already failed, the Build Back Better...
part of the whole One Belt, One Road initiative is the idea of using national currencies, Dr. Oberg, getting away from the petrodollar. See, this is a massive bone of contention. It's something not just the One Belt, One Road initiative, it's something that all the BRICS nations are all working towards, and that is using national currencies for international trade. Bye-bye US dollar. Look what's going on with Saudi Arabia and China. China is the biggest buyer of oil from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and China, well, they're veering away from the petrodollar. China wants to use yuan or the Saudi rial to do oil trade now. The petrodollar is part of the backbone of the US economy and supports its foreign policy. So what we're seeing right now around the world with the burgeoning growth of BRICS, because Saudi Arabia, Iran, Argentina, they want to join BRICS. And then, of course, you've got the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You are seeing a coagulation of allies and partners around the world for the immediate future. And it's something Vladimir Putin has said in recent weeks, time and time again. He says nothing can stop the changes that are now happening around the world. He's referring to that of a newborn multipolar order, isn't he, sir?
Oh, well, with due respect, the president of Russia, Putin, is not the first one who said that. Some of us have said it for the last 20 years, that this is Toynbee said it, the macro historian. Everybody has worked with empires going up and empires going down. And there are some indicators when they do. One is over-militarization. One is lack of legitimacy in the eyes of other countries. Another one is lack of innovation and new plans and visions. A third one is that you're no longer a model to younger states around the world, etc. Plus, this is history. And it is history that we go up and we go down. One day, China may be the shining big country in the world. And, you know, in 50, 100 years from now, they may not be. And somebody else is turning up. Africa, God knows what. This is the stupidity of the West, sorry for my word, is not to recognize that the best we can do is to cooperate with the world instead of fighting everybody like an old grumpy patriarch who is annoyed with his children no longer listening to him. I mean, I'm using these simple pictures because I think they're important psychologically. What you see in the West now is psychopolitical projection of what we do bad ourselves. We accuse others of doing bad. We're doing these bad things much more and to a much larger extent, such as killing people around the world. And therefore, it's time for the allies of the United States in Europe to help the United States look with a realism on what the world order changes is about and where its new place can be. The US has so much to give the world if it wants to and if it could turn around. And secondly, we will all be in danger if we don't help the United States also to adapt to the global changes. We don't want the Cold War to become warm. And that's why I'm back to the issue. We must cooperate for the sake of humanity's future, no matter what we think of each other.
Dr. Oberg, I'm running very, very low on time here, but you really raised some good points. I mean, you talk about the Cold War era, for example, and geopolitical tensions between certain of the biggest players on the blocks. It seems that there's a Cold War mentality that's even becoming more pervasive around certain parts of the world. Like I said to you earlier, we're seeing certain groupings, certain coagulations of allies and other countries out there that seem wary of the West. They seem a bit scared of the dollar, because if you're using the dollar for international trade, which just about everybody does, you're potentially going to be sanctioned if you upset the power masters in Washington, D.C. Tell me this, Doctor, before I let you go. America and NATO, they say that they have every right to have a presence in and around the South China Sea, something China basically disagrees with. It is an awfully far way away from Europe and America. It is China's backyard. But does NATO, does America have a reasonable attitude in this, saying that we can drive our military vessels up and down your coastlines anytime, any day of the week?
You could do that when you dominated the world. You could do that when you were number one, militarily, economically, culturally, etc. You no longer are. And that's where the adaptation should take place. No. Also because the United States would never accept that proximity, that closeness of China to its own coast, be it California or Florida. The US would not accept, if it was placed where Russia is placed, that somebody made an adversarial alliance up to the very border and placed its weapons there. The US is running on exceptionalism, as we all know, had done so for a long time. Once upon a time, they had, if you will, the powers and the right and the charm and the vision to do so. It's no longer the case. And secondly, they're running on this completely bizarre idea of a rules-based international order. The only rules-based international order there is in this world is the United Nations Charter and international laws and the Geneva Conventions. Why are we doing something else? Because we're on the way down, we're decaying, but we're still suffering from hubris. We can do whatever we please and we can bully the world and they will listen to it. No, they won't listen to the United States that much anymore. And that's where the allies should have a better antenna function and help the United States, their friend, to adapt to the new world, which will be multipolar. It is not going to be a world dominated with a Chinese empire. The Chinese do not come with a sword and they do not come with a Bible. They do business and they do friendship and whatever you call it, but they're not building an empire. And that's why they are not a threat to the Western world. If we could analyze the Chinese philosophy, mentality and culture in a much better way than we do today, they're not going to an empire role after the United States. They are simply not that stupid to believe that one system, communist parties all over the world or something like that, would be possible or desirable. That's a Western Christian missionary idea, and we have to leave it behind if we're all going to survive.
Some really interesting commentary there from Dr. Jan Oberg, the director of the Transnational Foundation for Peace and Future Research. I love how you take a broader global perspective on what seems to be a small story for now regarding Taiwan and Pelosi, but there are such broader global implications. We really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us here on RT International.
I appreciate it too.
Thanks. Now, just